The little home on Maple Street had once been full of laughter, the sound of a young girl chasing bubbles, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, and the warmth that made every corner feel alive. Daniel, a quiet high school biology teacher who also coached soccer, loved the steady rhythm of their life. His wife, Mara, was a marketing executive, ambitious, bright, always in motion. For 10 years, they'd built a family with their 8-year-old daughter, Naya, dreaming of adding another child soon. But lately, something had shifted. Mara had become distant, late nights, long meetings, and a coldness that left Daniel awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had changed. He told himself it was stress, that her job demanded too much. He wanted to believe that. Then came the night that cracked everything open. It started at a charity fundraiser, a fancy hotel event Mara insisted they attend. Naya stayed with Daniel's parents, and Daniel put on a suit he barely liked, standing awkwardly with a glass of soda while Mara floated through the crowd. She looked stunning in her black dress, glowing under the lights, her laughter echoing across the room. But when Daniel saw her with a man he didn't recognize, tall, confident, leaning close, something inside him froze. The man's hand brushed her arm. Their eyes lingered too long. That small moment told a truth he wasn't ready to face. Later that night, Daniel went looking for Mara. He turned a corner near the side hall of the hotel, and there she was. Her lips were on the man's. The sound of her soft laugh broke him. He stood still, unable to breathe. But he wasn't the only witness. Another woman, the man's wife, it turned out, had seen them too. Her voice cut through the hallway like glass. "So, this is what you call a work trip, huh?" The argument exploded, echoing down the corridor. Guests turned to look. Mara, flustered and unsteady, tried to back away, but in her panic, she stumbled on the stairs and fell. Everything that followed felt like a blur. The crowd gasped, someone called for help, and Daniel rushed forward as paramedics pushed through. The flashing red lights painted the marble floor as they carried Mara away on a stretcher. Daniel followed in silence, heart pounding, unable to tell whether it was fear or betrayal that filled his chest. At the hospital, the doctor said she'd be fine. Just a mild concussion, a bruise, nothing more. But the real wound wasn't on her skin. It was in the look Daniel gave her when she opened her eyes. When she woke, she cried. "It was a mistake, Danny. Please believe me," she said, voice shaking. She told him the man's name, Alex, and confessed to a 4-month affair. "It just happened," she whispered. "I felt alive again." Her words cut deeper than the confession itself. Daniel listened in silence. No shouting, no tears, just the quiet collapse of everything he had trusted. That night, after she fell asleep, he opened her phone. The messages were still there. The flirtation. The hotel plans. The words, "You're my escape." Every sentence stabbed like a blade. The next morning, his anger didn't explode. It froze. Solid, cold, unmovable. Everyone around him, her family, his brother, even the doctor, urged him to forgive. "She's hurt," they said. "She needs you." But Daniel couldn't see pain in her eyes without remembering her laughter with another man. Her betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a decision. One she made while he trusted her completely. So he called a lawyer, asked about custody, about how to keep Naya's world intact. Forgiveness, he decided, wasn't healing. It was surrender. The town began to whisper. The fundraiser incident spread fast. People talked about the fall, the affair, the drama. Daniel didn't need to explain anything. The truth had a way of traveling on its own. Alex's wife filed for divorce, and when Daniel found her email online, he sent her copies of the messages. He didn't sign his name, but he didn't have to. Soon, Alex's company opened an internal investigation, and Mara's reputation started to crumble. It wasn't revenge. It was reality catching up. When Mara came home from the hospital, she was fragile, eyes swollen from crying. "I'll end it," she said, placing her phone in his hand like proof of repentance. "We can fix this, Danny. For Naya." He looked at her, but all he could see was that hallway, her hands tangled with someone else's. He told her she could stay with her sister for a while. "Naya needs stability," he said quietly. "And I need space." It wasn't anger in his tone. It was exhaustion. A love that had reached its last breath. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers only grew louder. Friends chose sides. His best friend, Mark, told him not to take her back. Her mother called every night, begging him to try counseling. But Daniel had made his decision. Some doors, once closed, shouldn't reopen. Mara started showing up to Naya's soccer games, waving from the bleachers, pretending everything was normal. Naya waved back, innocent, unaware of the storm between her parents. But Daniel couldn't forget. Every time he saw Mara's face, he remembered the kiss, the fall, the lie. Naya was Daniel's anchor through the silence that followed. Her giggles filled the house with a fragile kind of peace. "Daddy, can we paint my room yellow?" she asked one morning, brush in hand, hair tied in a messy ponytail. He smiled and nodded, though his heart was heavy. They painted together, streaks of color spreading like sunlight across the wall. Each stroke reminded him why he couldn't go back. He wasn't protecting his pride, he was protecting her. Mara's choices had already taken enough. At night, when the house was quiet, Daniel would sit in the living room, scrolling through old photos on his phone. Trips to the zoo. Naya's birthday parties. Mara's smile before everything changed. The memories hurt, but he couldn't delete them. They were proof of a life that once existed, one he could never fully bury. Sometimes, Naya would sneak out of her room and curl beside him. "When will Mommy come home?" she'd ask. Daniel's throat would tighten. "She's staying with Aunt Lena for now," he'd answer softly. "But she loves you very much." Mara tried to make amends. She sent handwritten letters, apologizing again and again. She dropped gifts on the doorstep, Naya's favorite snacks, a small necklace, even a framed picture of the three of them. Daniel didn't respond. He placed the items in a box in the attic, out of sight but never fully forgotten. The town's gossip swirled around them. Some called him heartless. Others said he was strong. But Daniel didn't care about opinions anymore. He cared about peace, about keeping Naya's world safe and steady. One Sunday afternoon, Mara came to the park during Naya's soccer practice. Daniel saw her standing by the fence, eyes red, hands trembling. When the game ended, Naya ran to her. Mara hugged her tightly, tears falling into her daughter's hair. Daniel didn't stop them. He watched from a distance, silent, his arms folded. When Mara approached afterward, she spoke quietly. "Danny, I'm not asking for us anymore. I just want to be in her life." He nodded slightly. "You already are," he said. Then he walked away. The divorce papers arrived a week later. Neat, official, emotionless. Daniel signed them, without ceremony. It felt like closing a book that had already burned. Mara hesitated before signing hers, her hand shaking, but she knew there was no undoing what she'd done. Their marriage wasn't ending because of one mistake. It was ending because she'd chosen that mistake again and again, every time she'd lied, every time she'd hidden. After the papers were filed, Mara's life began to unravel in quiet ways. Her company reassigned her projects. Colleagues avoided her in the hallway. The man she'd risked everything for, Alex, had already moved away, trying to rebuild his own life. The world she had chased now seemed cold and empty. She'd lost not only her husband but her anchor, her home, her steady rhythm. Every voicemail she left for Daniel went unanswered. "Please," she'd whisper into the phone. "I just want to talk." But there was nothing left to say. For Daniel, the house became both a refuge and a reminder. The empty side of the bed, the faint smell of Mara's perfume, the framed photos still on the wall, they all spoke of what once was. But slowly, he learned to breathe again. He cooked breakfast for Naya, helped her with homework, taught her how to ride her bike without training wheels. They started new traditions: pizza Fridays, movie nights on the couch, bedtime stories that ended with laughter instead of silence. Sometimes at night, Daniel thought about forgiveness. Not for her, but for himself. He had carried so much anger that it had begun to wear him down. One evening, He stood on the porch watching Naya chase fireflies. Her joy reminded him that love didn't end just because a marriage did. It changed form. It became protection, patience, resilience. He whispered into the dark, "We'll be okay." And for the first time, he believed it. Mara continued to drift on the edge of their lives. Birthday cards, occasional visits, awkward smiles at school events. Naya still adored her mother, innocent to the weight of what had happened. Daniel never spoke badly about Mara in front of her. He didn't need to. Time would teach Naya what kind of man her father had been. Calm, steady, unwilling to let betrayal rewrite his story. The scars were still there, but they no longer bled. They had become part of him, quiet reminders of lessons learned the hardest way. Months passed, and life began to find a rhythm again. Daniel returned to coaching the school's soccer team, something that had once brought him joy. The boys greeted him with high fives and loud laughter, calling him Coach D like old times. Between classes and practices, the emptiness inside him slowly dulled. Sometimes, he would glance at the bleachers, half expecting to see Mara there, smiling proudly as she used to. But she never came. Only Naya did, waving with both hands, her bright voice cutting through the noise. "Go, Daddy." That was enough. Mara, meanwhile, tried to rebuild her image at work, but the shadows followed her. Her boss reassigned her to smaller clients, and whispers trailed behind her whenever she walked into meetings. She avoided social gatherings and spent more time alone. Nights were the hardest. She'd lie awake, replaying her choices like scenes from a movie she couldn't pause. How did I lose everything for someone who never stayed? She would ask herself in the dark. Guilt had become her closest companion. One afternoon, Mara stopped by Daniel's house with a box of Naya's old toys. "She left these last weekend," she said softly. Daniel took the box but didn't invite her in. They stood at the doorway, the silence heavy between them. "You look tired," Mara said. Daniel nodded. "Parenting alone will do that," he replied, his tone calm but firm. She looked down, holding back tears. "I'm sorry, Danny," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "But sorry doesn't change what happened." He closed the door gently, not out of anger, but finality. At school, Naya started talking more about her friends' families. "Emma's mom and dad both came to her recital," she said one night. Daniel smiled faintly. "And we'll both come to yours," he promised. True to his word, when the recital day came, he sat in the front row. Mara arrived too, sitting quietly at the back. When Naya spotted them both, her face lit up. For those few minutes, Daniel let go of the past. He clapped when she finished, smiling toward Mara, not in forgiveness, but in peace. After the recital, Mara approached him outside. "You've done well with her," she said, voice trembling slightly. "She's happy." Daniel nodded. "She's strong," he replied. "Like her mother." Mara blinked in surprise, unsure if it was kindness or truth. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod, then walked Naya to the car. That brief exchange lingered with Mara for days, the first time he'd spoken her name without anger. It wasn't reconciliation. It was release. As seasons changed, Daniel noticed how much lighter he felt. He stopped checking Mara's social media, stopped replaying the night of the fundraiser in his mind. He began reading again, something he hadn't done in months. On weekends, he and Naya took trips to the lake, feeding ducks, skipping stones, and sharing ice cream cones. The world seemed simpler again. Every laugh, every hug, every bedtime story reminded him that healing didn't come suddenly. It came in small, steady moments. Mara began therapy, at her sister's urging. The sessions forced her to confront truths she'd long avoided, her need for attention, her restlessness, her fear of stillness. "You kept running because you didn't know how to stop," her therapist said gently one day. That sentence stayed with her. For the first time, she didn't cry out of regret, but out of clarity. She wrote in her journal, "I broke something I can't fix, but I can still become better than the person who did it." One afternoon, months later, Naya came home with a school project titled My Hero. She held up her drawing proudly. It was of Daniel holding her hand. "It's you, Daddy," she said. "Because you never give up." Daniel's eyes softened. You think so? He asked. Yes, she said confidently. Even when Mommy made you sad, you still smiled for me. He hugged her tightly, words failing him. That night, he placed the drawing on his desk, a reminder that love, real love, is shown in the quiet consistency of care. Mara saw the project during her next visit. Naya proudly showed her. Look, Mommy, I drew Daddy as my hero. For a second, Mara's heart cracked open. She smiled, even as tears stung her eyes. That's beautiful, baby, she said softly. Later, sitting alone in her car, she whispered, he deserves that. It wasn't envy she felt, it was acceptance. For the first time, she stopped trying to fix what was broken and began to forgive herself for breaking it. As spring arrived, Daniel felt the house finally breathe again. The scent of blooming flowers drifted through the open windows, mixing with the sound of Naya's laughter. He had painted the walls a soft blue, replacing every trace of the life that once felt heavy. It feels new, Naya said one evening as they set the table together. It does, Daniel replied, smiling faintly. What she didn't know was that he had painted not just the walls, but the memories too. Every color was a choice to start over. Mara began volunteering at a local shelter on weekends. The first day, she served food to strangers, expecting judgment. But no one cared who she was or what she had done. They just smiled and thanked her. That humility steadied her heart. She met people who had lost far more than she had: homes, families, jobs. And yet, they were kind. You learn grace by losing it first, an elderly woman told her. That sentence became her quiet guide. One evening, Mara called Daniel. Can we talk? She asked. There was a pause, then his voice calm, steady. About what? She hesitated. About how we do this better. For Naya. He agreed to meet at a cafe the next morning. They sat across from each other, the air heavy with unspoken memories. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I just want us to stop walking on glass. Daniel looked at her, then nodded. We can be kind, he said, even if we can't be us. It wasn't reconciliation. It was maturity. After that conversation, something subtle shifted between them. Exchanges about Naya became smoother. Birthdays, holidays, and school events felt less tense. They still spoke little, but there was no bitterness. One evening, when Mara dropped Naya off, Daniel said quietly, Thank you for coming. It was simple, but it meant everything. That night, Mara cried, not from sorrow, but from gratitude that peace was possible, even after ruin. Daniel began writing again, something he hadn't done since college. He filled notebooks with reflections about family, pain, forgiveness, and resilience. It wasn't for anyone else. It was his way of untangling the mess inside him. He even thought about turning it into a book one day. You're writing a lot lately, Naya said, peeking over his shoulder. He smiled. It helps me think.
She grinned.
Can I write too? Always, he said. Stories keep our hearts soft. Mara, too, found her footing again. She was promoted at a smaller firm that valued her experience, but didn't judge her past. There, she rebuilt her confidence slowly, learning to lead without losing herself. She stayed off social media, focused on work, therapy, and quiet weekends. Her sister noticed the change. You seem calmer, Lena said one night over tea. I finally stopped running, Mara replied. And the world stopped spinning. One Sunday, Daniel and Naya visited a new park. They spread out a blanket under a tree and ate sandwiches while the sun dipped low. Do you think Mommy will come? Naya asked. Maybe next time, Daniel said, brushing her hair gently. She loves you, you know. I know, she replied, smiling. They watched the sky turn pink, the air soft with peace. For Daniel, it was enough, this simple, honest life without the weight of pretending. That night, Mara received a photo from Daniel, Naya holding an ice cream cone, her smile wide and bright. The message beneath it said only, she had a good day. Mara stared at the screen, her throat tightening. It was the first time he had reached out to her voluntarily in almost a year. She replied with a single heart emoji, nothing more. That small exchange carried the warmth of something long gone, but not forgotten: mutual respect. Years slipped by quietly. Daniel never remarried, but he found happiness in small things: morning jogs, his students' laughter, the steady rhythm of ordinary days. Mara dated once or twice, but never seriously. Her love for Naya became her compass, her purpose. Every birthday, the three of them celebrated together. Awkward at first, then gently familiar. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic reunions, just peace. And sometimes, peace is the only redemption left. When Naya turned 12, her school hosted a family day. Parents were invited to share what family meant to them. Daniel expected her to feel awkward. Two parents no longer together, sitting on opposite sides of the classroom. But Naya surprised him. When it was her turn, she stood up and said, "Family means love, even when people live in different houses. My mommy and daddy both show me that." The room fell silent for a second before the applause came. Daniel caught Mara's eye. She smiled, tears shimmering, and for the first time in years, he smiled back. After the event, they walked Naya to the car together. "You raised a good girl," Mara said softly. Daniel shook his head. "We did." They stood there for a moment, awkward but warm. "You know," Mara said, "I used to think forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened. But I think it's really just learning to live without anger." Daniel nodded. "Maybe," he replied. "Forgiveness is just quiet acceptance." They didn't hug, but they didn't need to. The air between them finally felt light. Years continued to pass. Naya grew taller, more confident, her mother's boldness mixed with her father's calm. She became captain of her soccer team, a small echo of Daniel's past. Mara and Daniel sat beside each other at games, cheering her on. "She's fast," Mara said once, laughing. "She gets that from you." "Maybe," Daniel said, smiling. "But the determination? That's all you." In those moments, they weren't ex-spouses. They were simply parents, proud, united in the only way that still mattered. When Naya turned 16, she asked a question Daniel didn't expect. "Dad, do you still love Mom?" He paused, setting down his book. "That's a big question," he said gently. "I'll always care about her. But love changes, Naya. Sometimes it turns into respect. Sometimes it becomes a memory." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "I think that's still love, just softer." Daniel chuckled softly. "Maybe you're right." Mara heard about that conversation weeks later, when Naya mentioned it during lunch. "You talked about love?" she asked, smiling nervously. "Yeah," Naya said. "Dad said love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape." Mara went quiet, staring at her daughter with admiration. "He's right," she whispered. Later that night, she sent Daniel a short message. "Thank you for how you speak about me." His reply came minutes later. "You're still her mother. You'll always matter." That was all she needed. As the years folded into each other, Mara finally found peace. She forgave herself in full. Not by forgetting, but by learning. She helped mentor younger women at work, guiding them away from mistakes she once made. "Don't run from what's hard," she would tell them. "Face it, or it will follow you." People began to see her not as the woman who fell from grace, but the one who rose with humility. Daniel grew older too. His hair grayed at the temples, and laughter lines deepened near his eyes. He still taught biology and coached soccer, finding purpose in shaping young lives. Every now and then, he'd see couples holding hands at the park and feel a flicker of nostalgia, not sadness, but gratitude for the love he once knew. He never remarried, but he didn't feel lonely. His life, though imperfect, was full. When Naya graduated high school, both her parents sat side by side, clapping and wiping away tears. After the ceremony, she pulled them both into a hug. "You're my favorite people," she said, grinning. For that brief moment, time melted. The pain, the history, the what-ifs, all replaced by quiet joy. They stood there under the open sky, three people bound not by perfection, but by persistence. Years later, when Naya was grown and living on her own, Daniel and Mara crossed paths again at a community fundraiser, the same kind of event where everything had once fallen apart. This time, though, there was no tension. Just two people who had survived the storm and learned to live with its lessons. Mara raised her glass softly. "To new beginnings," she said. Daniel smiled. "And to endings that teach us how to start again." In that moment, forgiveness wasn't a word. It was the air they shared, calm and whole at last. Please like, comment, and subscribe.